In this week's economic report, I'd like to focus on three things and their impact on Israel. The first is the OECD report that came out this week that comes out every 2 years, and it showed that Israel's response and recovery from the COVID pandemic is very promising. And we're looking at a GDP growth of over 2.8% in the next year, which is very promising for Israel, especially around the world where GDP has slowed and inflation is rampant and out of control. In Israel, it's still at around the 5%, and that's very promising. Of course, there was the issue that the OECD report pointed out, and this was capitalized upon by one major Israeli news outlet. Instead of focusing, of course, on the whole promising report of Israel's economy, it focused that the thing that Israel really needed to do was to cut yeshiva funding and something called the Vrechim funding. And these are people who sit and learn in the koila, which is where people sit and learn Torah all day, and they discuss halachic laws and the implications for daily lives. And the OECD reported that these needed to be cut for a stronger labor participation, because of course the next demographic time bomb is the Haredi community that is growing and growing and growing, and people are not participating in the labor force as much as the rest of the Israeli economy. And so we could see an imbalance in the Israel economy itself. And of course, the major news outlet that reported on this ignored the whole big picture, was that Israel's economy was very promising, and it focused on that. And of course, it also missed out that another big looming issue that we could see soon is that the Arab sector is far more underrepresented in the high-tech industry, in high-paying jobs. The Arab sector and the economy is performing much lower than the Haredi sector. And the Haredi sector has got less education. For instance, they don't teach English, maths, or sciences in many Haredi schools, and yet in the Arab sector they do, but the level is very, very low. And the Arab sectors are people who do want to go out and work, as opposed to the Haredis who want to sit and learn all day. Or the Arabs do want to work, and yet still their labor participation is very low, and their wage disparity there is very high as well. We see that the real danger for Israel economy would be the Arab sector, especially when it is such a high percentage in Israel. The second thing that I think we should look at for the economy is that the governor of the central bank in Israel has raised the interest rate another 0.25%, and this comes after, this is I think the fourth consecutive time that the governor has raised the interest rate. And although many ministers in the government have come out against it and said that this is a political move, especially criticizing the fact that the governor blamed the interest rate hike on the judicial reforms, and the connection between the interest rate hike and the reforms is still unclear, and it could still just be a political statement by the governor. But we still see that inflation is still high, and so this does warrant a high increase in the interest rate, although some people have pointed out that the governor, that the central bank has lost control, has lost the ability to control inflation. And so we should disassociate the political statements of the governor and the real fact that the inflation in Israel is still on a high. The third thing that we should look at is the decision by the OPEC plus countries to cut oil supply across the world. And although there have been mass ramifications for US foreign diplomacy, we should look at the two main issues that Israel faces with this decision. The first impact is that oil makes up 40% of Israel's energy supply, and all of that is imported. And so that means that Israel could see another rise in oil prices, just like the rest of the world would. But the second real and bigger impact is that the Saudis have basically moved away from the US and Israel alliance, and they're looking towards the shift towards Russia, China, and India. And this could spell trouble for the Israeli economy that is trying to base a lot of its sectors in Saudi. They sold a port to the Chinese and to the Saudis, and they do want more investors from the Arab world. And when the Saudi will move towards the Iranian side, and we saw them normalizing diplomacy, then we could see a real danger for Israel investment in the Middle East. And this does have ramifications for Israel's foreign diplomacy as well, but that will be discussed in another video. So that's it for this week and this update of Israel's economy.